My name is Ashley Eastman, and I did my project on Clostridium difficile, also known as C. diff. Sharon Roy, who was my mentor, was a huge help in all of this. She gave me great guidance, and she definitely made getting the project to where it is right now much easier for me. Sharon has over 30 years of experience as a registered nurse, and she has worked in clinical education before. So her insight and her knowledge of how to get policies and procedures and guidelines passed was definitely very helpful. The overall goal for this project was to get some sort of C. difficile guidelines implemented at Cuyuna Regional Medical Center, also known as CRMC, as they currently have no nursing guidelines for when to test or who to test for C. diff. The only thing that they have in their system is within Epic or Excellion. When you go to place a C. diff order, it just asks, has the patient had 3 or more loose stools within 24 hours? And has the patient taken laxatives or stool softeners? Outside of that, there is no policy, guidelines, procedure, or algorithm for any of the providers. So, introducing some sort of guideline or new policy will lead to decreased costs for the facility and the patient. It also, without guidelines, leads to inappropriate or ineffective testing, and then it causes barriers between healthcare workers and the patient, as well as the patient and the family. When you think of all the gowning and gloving and all the extra steps that family and staff have to go to protect the patient and to protect us from potentially coming in contact with this type of bacteria. There are a few key resources used throughout this project. The two biggest ones were my mentor, Sharon Roy. She gave me the idea of going to the nursing committee to get my guidelines implemented at the facility, which was way better than my idea of going to the med surge unit's nursing manager to get approval and to go through him to get clearance, as that had proved to provide way more layers than I could ever imagine. But going right to the nursing committee, they ate it right up, and eventually these guidelines will be implemented. The other huge resource used throughout this was Lord Livingston Library at MSU Moorhead. Their resources provided the research and studies and evidence that I needed to back up the foundation for this project. And then I also used CRMC's procedure manual to study what current policies and practices they had in effect for their infection control processes. And it turns out they had nothing in their procedure manual related to C. diff. So just some quick evidence related to C. difficile. C. difficile infections cost U.S. healthcare systems over $6 billion a year. Over 50% of antibiotic administration is unmerited. When a patient is taking a laxative and they are being tested for C. diff, only 10% are positive. And so this is important because most people or nursing staff and providers think, oh, a patient has loose stools, so we need to test them for C. diff. However, a lot of our patients are already taking laxatives, whether it's because they need it for bowel stimulation or because maybe they just had surgery. A lot of our patients are already taking laxatives. And so if we're testing these patients, this study shows that only 10% of those on these medications are positive for C. diff. So it's just unnecessary. They need to be off laxatives for 24 to 48 hours before testing them. And then one final study that I found is that C. difficile algorithms, when they are being used by facilities, decreases testing by about 40%. And so that just says that when providers and nurses, when we're going through an algorithm to say, yes, the patient meets this criteria, or no, they don't meet this criteria, when we follow these guidelines, the testing decreases dramatically. The IHI's model of improvement was used to help establish the aim and measures used throughout this project. The aim for this project was to effect a 25% reduction in unnecessary C. diff testing done on admitted patients on the med floor at CRMC by December 15th, 2019. The measure's outcome for this project was the percent of patients tested for C. diff pre and post implementation of a revised C. difficile protocol. The process measures used in this project include the percent of patients with diarrhea, percent of patients taking laxatives within the last 48 hours, percent of patients not tested for C. diff who have diarrhea, the number of staff that were updated on the new protocol, and the number of staff that rate a high satisfaction with the new protocol. The balancing measures used in this project were the percent of healthcare workers concerned about not testing patients with diarrhea, the number of increased training hours for healthcare workers, the number of days patients continue to have diarrhea when not tested for C. difficile, and patient and family satisfaction with their care after the implementation of the new protocol. The setting for this project was at CRMC on their med-surg unit, and most of my time on this project was spent in the planning stage. There was a lot of revisions that went around as far as revising my original plan. Originally, I wanted to create a policy or a procedure, but then it became evident that that would take a very, very long time to do, and that it would be easier to get a guideline or an algorithm in place. And then my facilitators, Sharon Roy was, again, very important to all this, my nursing peers. So the people I work with, getting their ideas and their input on this process was also very crucial. So this is the algorithm that I presented to the nursing committee. This is a pretty generic version of many of the algorithms that I found that are currently being used at other facilities. And as we learned earlier, using an algorithm decreases C. diff testing by over 40%. And so the two big ones on here are, one, does the patient have at least 3 loose stools a day? This is very important because just because the patient says, hey, I had diarrhea, that does not mean they get tested. If they only had one episode, they should not be tested. And I've heard multiple times ED nurses say, oh, they have C. diff. We better get them tested. Otherwise, the med-surg floor won't take them if they get admitted without a stool sample. And so really a patient needs to have 3 or more loose stools within 24 hours to qualify for testing. And the other big one is the patient taking laxatives? If they are taking laxatives, they need to be off those laxatives for 48 hours prior to testing and then to reassess them for the need for testing. So the overall evaluation of this project, unfortunately the aim, which was to reduce C. difficile testing, was not achieved. The planning process went well. I had all the research and evidence that I needed to back up what I presented to the nursing committee. However, I was supposed to present to the nursing committee the first week of November. However, that meeting was canceled. And so then I presented in the first week of December. And that meeting went so well. They not only want this algorithm and guidelines, but they actually want to implement and create a policy for C. difficile testing. And so at their meeting in January, they are going to meet with infection control, and they are going to go and they are going to put together a policy to get approved by the facility. And so that makes me feel really good that this project is moving forward. However, we didn't achieve it by the deadlines that we needed for this class, which did teach me that it takes a long time to get stuff through all the red tape, which I didn't imagine would actually take that long. So that is definitely something I learned. So other than the setback with the November meeting, I feel like this project went really well. That setback by the November meeting being canceled created a month wait between meetings. There's an entire month between November and December where there was literally nothing that I could do to encourage implementation of these guidelines or anything like that.